Australia, we're nearly all of us from somewhere, aren't we? And that's
Yes.
what we celebrate, and that's what we're all about celebrating here. Because I'm from the UK, first generation, so we settled here back in the dark ages of the 70s. Of course, Em's from overseas. And that's one of the things we wanted to talk to you about, because I know you and Em have had conversations about your family heritage, which is
Yes.
Scottish, I
Yes.
believe, from good Scottish migrant stock. So, but you were born in New Zealand?
Yes, yes. So
Yes, yes,
my
that's second generation.
mother's family emigrated from Scotland, and my father is Irish, but I think his family sort of emigrated possibly a generation before. They were well and truly entrenched by the time my mum's family landed.
Wow. So tell us a little bit about the journey that you know of, anyhow, with your family and your grandparents. Take us on that journey with them.
It was tough, if I can say it succinctly. It was tough. So it began post World War II. My granddad had been part of the war, and when he came back, they realised that they had 5 children. Gosh, sorry, now you're making me even think about. Granddad would come home on leave, and the family kept growing. I hope you can cut these things over the years, but he came back, and their 2 elder boys. There was a concern that the gangs of Glasgow might just be an attraction point for them. And despite the fact that as a couple they had grown together and built a life out of the tenements, they had started their young married life in those tenements of Glasgow and managed to get themselves into their own home. But they thought they really needed to walk away from all of that and start a new life. And they had a choice. There was Perth, there was Canada, and there was Auckland. And even though my granny had family in Canada, they moved to Auckland because my granddad's family would sponsor them. So that was the beginning of the migration to New Zealand. And granddad had to go out to New Zealand to get established. So he had to get a job, he had to get a house, he had to have everything settled before Granny and the 5 children were allowed. And at this time, Granny was left in Scotland. Her mum had passed away. So she was, going through the grieving period of losing her mum with whom she was incredibly close, to be left as a single mum raising 5 children. And my wee Granny Mary, she's tough. She was 5 foot in heels sort of thing, but that didn't define her character. And I know that she talked about banging on the port office door every day to get a ticket, because it was a case of, please don't call us, we'll call you. But for Granny, that just wasn't an option. And so selling up the house. And then I can't even imagine. So this was, where are we, early 50s, coming on a boat for 6 weeks with
With five.
5 children,
Mm.
with the youngest being 5 and I think the eldest being 15. And just to put the poverty into perspective, I remember them talking about the baby Eddie when he was born. If you have a chest of drawers at home, imagine pulling out the bottom drawer. Well, that was the crib. It was all of those sorts of things. So then moving out to poor Granny, bless her soul, she arrived in Auckland only to find that the wealthy family who had promised, well, they had sponsored Granny and Granddad, they struggled with the fact that they loved Granddad on his own, but when Granny and the 5 children arrived, it was a little bit of, oh, you're the poorest church mice family. I'm just not sure that you're
Oh,
quite the right fit for our lifestyle.
oh no.
Can you imagine it? I
Oh
just
no.
I just can't imagine. So uh, they moved out to Beachlands, which is now, to add insult to poor Granny Mary's injury, is a millionaire's paradise. But at the time, way back then, Beachlands was they lived in a beach shack in the middle of nowhere. There was
Mm.
one bus out every morning, one bus out every night. And so Granny was left with the 5 kids again to raise them while Grandad went off and, found work. Again, actually, it was funny. It was my husband Andrew, his family immigrated from Wales, and his granddad and my granddad had horror stories of employment opportunities. They were essentially given the worst of the worst jobs because they thought,
Oh,
you know, you're desperate, you have to feed your family, you'll make do. So Granddad did work hard to find alternative jobs. But again, that abject poverty and trying to overcome the poverty and find solutions. I remember Granny sort of swallowing her strong Scottish pride and taking her little suitcase up to the baker, who was such a kind soul, and he would pack Granny's suitcase with bread or bread rolls or whatever hadn't been sold in the shop every day, so that Granny could then take that food home to help feed her family of five. The beach shack, Granddad had to build a little wall, and I think the boys were all bunked in one room. Mum was sort of given her own little makeshift room. I know they talked about arriving when there was a drought and running down to the beach, I think, with the old bar of soap when the rains finally came, because I don't know whether water was a scarcity and that was, and they couldn't afford to ship in water. And I don't know if I think I said to you that the discrimination in terms of their language. They spoke English, but their Scottish accent, they were rejected because they didn't speak Queen's English. I thought that was incredible. And to think that the nuns at the kids' school were so cruel. They would strap the kids with either leather or the ruler because they didn't speak Queen's English. I just thought that was
Oh
incredible.
no.
Absolutely. Yes, yes. And again, being poor, I know that Mum talked about it when we were going through high school, wanting to make sure that our uniforms were as close to the school uniform as possible, that we didn't stand out because we looked like we had the stitched, patched up school
Mm.
uniform that might have been. So yes, and Granny won't mind me sharing this, that she did have, I would say, one if not a few nervous breakdowns at the time, because there would have been no support, there would have been no counselling, no social services, nothing where she could have turned to. You literally had to stand on your own 2 feet and you had to survive. She talked about smoking, that was her trying to find somewhere quiet to smoke, was sort of her coping mechanism. Um, yes.
Very much so, and I can tell
Wow.
by what you've said that it's followed your mum and probably all your uncles as well. That growing up in that situation and formed their personalities and their outlooks on life as well.
Oh, definitely, definitely. And I suppose being Scottish, there's that fire in the belly, so it definitely inspired them to sort of go, look, you can give us whatever you want, but we will rise above it. Very
Excellent.
much so.
Yeah. And how did they adjust? How did they settle in and make their way eventually from that
They
little beach shack?
from that little beach they saved up like crazy, and well, actually, while they were saving up crazy, the local post office, the manager there was kind enough to give Granny a job, and just an entry level position, but it gave her that ability to get her independence, to get a little bit more income, and they could save and save like crazy to get themselves into a house in a nicer suburb closer to the city. And I do know that for Mum, again, that poverty stayed with the kids, in that they might have been in a nice home, but they had to save so much and go without for so much just so they could move in that next step, if that makes sense. So being frugal, I think it's entrenched in the Scottish culture and our values.
And no wonder. It sounds like it was of necessity, doesn't it?
Oh, it was. I mean, everything, whether it was baking or cooking, sewing, knitting, whatever it was, if they could do it rather than buy it from the shop and save, they would absolutely do that. And they all settled in. They all settled into, I think about the families. I had two uncles who moved to Australia. They wanted a bigger, brighter life, so they moved across. But the other three remained and settled into mainstream in terms of marrying, having kids,
Mhm.
all those sorts of things.
And what of your Scottish heritage do you carry? Do you still have some traditions or certain things that you can't
I think
escape?
it's, I think, oh, lots, lots. But I think it's that fiery, I don't know, that. if you think that something's not quite right, that advocacy piece, is really something that I think I said to you, Anne, that I remembered my granny saying, "Do not let a man define you. Do not
Yes.
let a man tell you what you can and cannot do." That, and I describe that as an accidental feminism. Jane Caro wrote the book Accidental Feminist, and I'm sure that that's exactly how you would describe my granny, in not knowing or calling it feminism. Andrew's grandmother was in Wales, World War II, so same generation, same era, and of course the men went away. And that was the first time that the women were really allowed to step up and step into roles that they wouldn't normally have held, because the men held those roles. And you know what? They did it. And you know what? They did it better. Andrew's nan was, the planes would come in, sadly, from crashes, and they would be, I don't know the machines, but they would be pulling things apart, and then, just the fine motor skills. And I remember Andrew's nan talking about how it was difficult when the men came home, because all of a sudden they wanted their place back, and the women were going, let's
We're
let's
not going
rethink
anywhere.
that. We're not going anywhere. So definitely pride. Pride is entrenched. It's pride in our Scottish heritage. And she also taught me that history is written by the victor. Doesn't always make it right. So I think that created my curiosity to always look beyond the immediate and go, so tell me more. How did that really happen? I'm studying to be a social scientist, so I think she has stirred that curiosity in me. Definitely the tartan, the bagpipes, can't go past a good bagpipe, and the tears and all of those sorts of things. Clan. When I think about our Scottish heritage and what she taught me, it was always love and laughter. First and foremost, love and laughter. You had to laugh, because if otherwise you cried. So laughter, always making a good joke. But definitely the clans. It was knowing that you weren't alone. You were never ever alone. That somebody was always there, even if not quite literally, but you belonged. And there was that sense of belonging to ancestors who I might never meet, but knowing they had continued this culture, this family identity, and and that was really important. That sort of gave you this solid ground. It's hard to describe, but knowing you were connected to a clan, knowing your clan had a tartan, and knowing that the world celebrated your tartan, whether it was yours literally or just the concept. Scottish pride, punk rock and the kilts and the black boots, all those sorts of things.
And that pride is very deep seated and very hard won, because of course if you go back a few generations when the tartan was banned and speaking their native tongue was banned, and the British, sorry, I have to do it, we British tried to take that away. They don't just do it to the colonies. They tried it in their own lands as well. And I knew none of
Absolutely.
this with my education until I went back to the UK and travelled around Scotland with my relatives, and the stories of the oppression and the wars and the fighting, and how strong the Scots had to be. Much
Absolutely.
like our Aboriginal people now, or
Mm,
First Nations people who, despite what they went through, have kept their culture, have kept their heritage. And the Scottish story there's parallels there, most definitely.
Yeah.
yes, and that's the point, about the history was written by the victor, because you were right. Granny grew up in school learning about the Scottish wars or the British wars, written by the British as opposed to the truth. And I know that one of my uncles joked, again, that laughter around oats, and the British thought they would punish the Scots by just giving them oats to eat, and the Scots gave the world porridge, so
They made it their own, exactly.
I think they should have kept haggis. I'm still not convinced that all of the food groups were ideal.
But it goes, you can make a meal with anything. That's
Yes,
again the
Mm-hmm.
frugalness.
yes, yes.
Adaptability.
hmm All of those things, all of those things.
Your family has, like, you've got such a rich history, and their journeys are, there's a lot of resilience. There's a lot of resilience
Yes.
throughout the years.
Mm-hmm.
What
Mm-hmm.
lessons do you think that has taught you, or how is that models to who you are today?
That resilience, that literally putting one foot in front of the other, pick yourself up. There are times even now where I'll talk to my granny Mary, and she might be trying to rest up in the heavens, but I'm always talking to her. Just knowing that you have to pick yourself up. You have to move forward. You have to find a way, and giving in, whilst it's a human response, always that, as I say, one step in front of another. Never give up, never give in. That's just entrenched. It's ingrained in my DNA. Never give up, never give in. Find another way. If the first way doesn't work, that's okay, but then you pivot. Then you pivot and you find another way. It's not about ever going, oh well, I tried, if that makes sense. And especially if the outcome is important, then you push, you ask those questions. And sometimes you just have to put on your brave boots and go into a space where you're not comfortable and just try it. Just do it anyway. Yes, because otherwise I'm just not too sure where they would have been as a family, and certainly then the impact on my life, if that makes sense. I could see the impact of their choices and never giving up, never giving in, trying something new, being adaptable and responsive, not being stuck in your ways. That was critical to the resilience. It wasn't about saying, well, Em, you're going to come to my way of thinking
Mhm.
and that's how I'm going to progress. It wasn't that
Wow.
arrogant, if that makes sense. It
Mhm.
was strength but not arrogance. I think that might be one of the defining points, one of the defining lessons that I had. It is about respectful relationships. It's not telling you how it's going to be, but just having that courage to reach out.
I like that. It's strength. It's strength. And Liz, in our conversations and most of the things we talk about, community is very important to you. And you
Yes.
mentioned at the beginning, it's this. I like that expression. The book you're saying, the documentary you saw on Elemental, where he was talking about, it's salad, it's different aspects coming in, and I really, really like that. So why do you think, or how have you seen community impacting the development of an economy?
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Let me start back with Elemental because he captured it. I just thought, oh, they've been to Logan and they're just wrapping it up in New York City. But he was talking about how his family came from Korea. His dad in the 1970s, his mum also came separately, and they met. And it was New York City back in the 70s. People were fleeing the city and moving out to the suburbs. They didn't want to be a
Mhm.
part of their community, the five boroughs. But it was the migrants who came, and they were the ones who invested their blood, sweat, and tears. They were the ones who created that vibrant economy. They were self employed, they were working, 18, 20 hours a day. They got up, even his father's story, he started off with a hot dog stand, the ones on the wheels, and then that was great. And then somehow he managed to save enough money and bought his first shop. And then from that, he worked hard and he bought his second shop. And the gentleman was saying, I'm not sure how they negotiated contracts because English wasn't their first language or their strongest language. But absolutely, New York City today, that community development, it was built on the back of the migrant community who are entrepreneurs. They are willing to take risks, they are willing to do whatever needs to be done.